Would you like to learn how to make bone broth? I have been making bone broth for nearly a decade, and today I'm going to show you how to do it. It's Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And today I'm going to walk you through the process of making any bone broth. I have made chicken, turkey, beef, venison, and pork bone broth. You can use it fresh, you can freeze it, you can pressure can it, or you can even make your own powdered version of it. If you want to learn how to make your own homemade bone broth or stock into a powdered bouillon, then you're going to want to watch the video that I recently created on how to make your own bouillon powder. I will link that here, and then I will also put that in the description below this video so you can watch that later. When I first started making bone broth, I followed the wisdom and instructions of Sally Fallon Morrell in her book, Nourishing Broth. I will link this book in the description below this video. I still recommend this book to anyone that's interested in making bone broth. This book is really an educational book because it not only tells you how to make bone broth, it also covers the various science and health benefits of the bone broth, as well as tells you how to use bone broth in various recipes. So I do recommend this book to anybody that's interested in making bone broth. Again, I will link that in the description below this video. So for today's video, I have made a turkey bone broth from my turkey carcasses from previous Thanksgivings. Now you can use raw bones or previously cooked bones like I'm doing in this particular video. So when making bone broth, you need to start with bones, and you're going to need a pot that needs to be big enough to have all of your bones in it and to make sure that those bones are covered with water. So there's various pots that you can use to make your bone broth. You can use a stock pot, you can use a crock pot, or you can use a Nesco roasting pan. Because I make large batches, I typically use my 20-quart stock pot, but I have also used my 22-quart Nesco roasting pan. Use whatever you have on hand, just as long as your bones can be covered in water. I want to take a moment just to talk about beef bones. So some people will actually roast their meaty beef bones before putting them in the stock pot. This is not necessary, but it is said to enhance the flavor and make a more colorful stock. Now, I have done this in the past with my fresh meaty beef bones and beef shanks. However, it's not necessary. If you want to learn more on how to do that, you can look inside the book that I mentioned under the classic beef stock recipe, and she talks about that there. To start making any bone broth, you're going to want to put any bones in that pot and cover it with water. Now, those bones can be frozen or they can be thawed. It doesn't matter. You do want to include some bones that have meat on them because the meat will enhance the flavor of the stock. So once you get all your bones into your stock pot with water, you're going to want to add some vinegar to your pot. Now, this can be any type of vinegar. I personally use apple cider vinegar. The vinegar is used to leach the minerals out of the bones. Now, in a pot that is a 20-quart stock pot, I usually use 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. If you're using a smaller pot, then you can use less vinegar. Just let the bones, water, and vinegar sit for 1 hour before turning the heat on. It is optional to add something like a pig's foot, beef's foot, or chicken feet to the stock. You could also add chicken backs, a chicken head or neck. These will make your stock more gelatinous, and again, it's optional, but it is recommended. I typically use pig's feet because they are found in the freezer section at the grocery stores in my area. So after the hour's up, then you can turn your pot on to a medium heat until it comes to a simmer. You are going to want to have your pot uncovered at this time. So when it comes to a simmer, you may notice that there is a scum that kind of rises to the top. If you notice that, make sure you try and skim all of that off as best you can. You're not going to be able to get everything, but try to get off as much of that as you can. After you're done skimming that, then go ahead and add your vegetables, herbs, and spices. Now for vegetables, I always add celery, carrots, and onion. Usually in my 20-quart stock pot, I'll add about 6 large carrots cut up, 6 celery stalks cut up, and 3 onions cut up. Now with the onions, you can use the skins and the ends as well, because remember, this is a bone broth. You're actually not going to be eating any of these vegetables that are in the stock pot. So go ahead and use your scraps as well. Now, if you're making less than a 20-quart stock pot, you could use a little bit less of the vegetables, but if you wanted to use that much, you could do that as well. It's really up to you. The vegetables are used to enhance the flavor as well as give it more nutrients and vitamins. You can also add any additional vegetables that you might have in your fridge or in your garden that you want to use up. So for this turkey bone broth recipe, I actually had a kohlrabi that was in my crisper that needed to be used up, so I added that to the stock as well. So for the herbs, I always add parsley, thyme, and at least 1 bay leaf. That is the minimum for herbs that I use in every recipe. So when I first started making bone broth years ago, that is what I did. I followed exactly what Sally said in her book. And then within the last 5 years, I started adding more herbs as well. So I still add the parsley, thyme, and bay leaf, and I usually add chives, oregano, lemongrass, and rosemary because I have those on hand. Now in this particular recipe, I also added something new. I started saving my basil stalks and flowers because I read that those are also beneficial. So I added those basil stalks and flowers in addition to all those other herbs that I mentioned earlier. Now remember, you just use what you have on hand. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to be adding to the pot are spices. So for spices, you're going to want to use crushed peppercorns of any color. So I typically use about 2 tablespoons of crushed peppercorns, but you can go ahead and use less if you're making less. Now, one thing I don't add is salt, and Sally mentions that as well in her book. With salt, there's a couple things that you're going to want to be aware of. So this broth will already be pretty flavorful with all the vegetables, the meat, and the herbs and spices. Some people are on a sodium restricted diet, so add the salt to the finished product when you're going to be consuming it. When and if you ever decide to boil it down to concentrate it like I do when I make my homemade bouillon powder, then it would become too salty. So it's really best to add the salt when you're actually going to be using the end product. So after you add all the vegetables, herbs, and spices, then let your stock pot come to a simmer again. I leave the lid off at this time until it has come to a simmer. Once it comes back up to that simmer, then I lower the stock pot down to a low level on my stove. And then what I will do is I generally put the lid on just slightly askew so that it does allow some of that steam to escape, and I can also monitor it. Now you could leave the lid off completely if you prefer. Now if I am going to be cooking this broth overnight, which I typically do, then just prior to going to bed, I will top it off with any additional water that might have boiled out, and then I will put the lid on tight, and I will make sure that my stove is on the very lowest setting. So this brings us to the next step in the bone broth making process, and that is, how long do you simmer the bones? The amount of time that you actually simmer the bones depends on the size of the bone. So the bigger the bones, the longer you want to simmer them to get the marrow and nutrients out. And the bigger the bones, the more often you can actually use them. So you can reuse bones. So let's talk about that. So beef, veal, or venison bones should simmer for 12 hours. I typically simmer mine for a minimum of 24 hours up to about 36 hours. And these bones can be used up to 3 times. Again, they're large bones, and so you can actually use them multiple times. Now, if you're using a smaller bone like a chicken bone or turkey bones or any bird bones, then those are generally simmered for a shorter amount of time. Now, the minimum time would be 4 hours, but you can definitely simmer them for longer. So for chicken bones, I typically simmer them for about 12 hours, and turkey bones, I'll go up to about 24 hours. So chicken bones can be used about 1 to 2 times, and turkey bones can be used twice. Now, you'll know when a bone is done being used because they will be super soft and mushy, and then that is when you have a couple options on how you want to use those bones. So we'll talk about that in a moment. If you're going to be using your bones again, then what you can do is just put them in a Ziploc bag and label it and then put it in the freezer. Typically, if I use them once, I will put them in a Ziploc bag. Sometimes I just put them in the same bag that they were in originally, that I took them out of the freezer. And so I will just write on there, used 1 time. So I'll write that on there so I know, okay, I've used these bones 1 time already, so I probably have 1 more time left to make with these particular bones. That's just how I do it. That's what works well for me. Now back to if the bones are already used and they're soft that you can like mush them in your hand, then you actually have multiple options that you can use with these particular bones. So first, you can obviously just toss them. So you could toss them in your garbage. You could actually compost them, depending upon the type of compost that you have, you could compost them. The third thing that you could do is you could give them to your cats, dogs, or chickens if they are soft enough. So the fourth thing that you could do is you could make bone meal to feed your plants. If you are interested in learning how to make your own bone meal fertilizer for your indoor and outdoor plants, then make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to be notified when that video comes out. Now that I told you the process of making bone broth itself, let me show you my setup and how I strain the broth. I will also be sharing my tips and tricks that I learned from my many batches of making bone broth. I have my 2 strainers. The other thing that I have, obviously, I use a measuring cup to take the liquid out, but I also have this, which is really nifty. I got this from the Pampered Chef, and you can get out a lot of food items with this to dump in here. To get some of those bigger bones and things, I just use a tongs, and then obviously a soup ladle to get some of that liquid out. So you can actually reuse the bones in your bone broth, so I will be putting them in here and reusing them. I try to reserve one of these for the bones. Usually I try to reserve this one for the bones because there's not as much bottom for liquid. So now everything is really settled to the bottom, so it'll take a little bit. Okay, so here's a bone and some veggies. There's the neck. So usually this is how I do it. Now you could just skim everything out of here, toss it all, or give it to your chickens, or do whatever you want. Usually what I'll do is if I have a bone, I will save it. I try to save it, and I'll throw it in here, and then this I'll reuse. Okay, so here you can see some bones, some veggies. So again, if I see a bone, I usually put them in here first to kind of let them drip off. So I just go through and I pick them out. What I'm going to do after I use them the second time is that I will mush them up, blend them up, whatever, and then I will kind of make like a paste with them, and then I will put them in the dehydrator, and I'll dehydrate them for bone meal for my plants and my garden. So you buy bone meal, and I can make my own. So that's what I'm gonna do. Again, you don't have to go through all the bones. Now, I'm just throwing them in here, so there are some, there are some herbs and stuff in there, so I'll kind of pick them off a little bit. Although because I'm going to use them again in another bone broth, I mean, I don't have to be too fancy. I can throw them back in here, but I try to have them pretty decently cleaned. You see at the bottom, this is why I strain it, because see at the bottom, there's all that juice. Now clearly it needs to be strained, but that's why I do it like this. And then because I'm, not straining just yet, I put it back in here. And then kind of give this, so usually I give this a little time to kind of soak down. And then in the meantime, I kind of go through this and then I'll just kind of clean it and put it here. I hadn't in the past, I wasn't saving any of the mushy bones. I was just tossing the mushy bones. If it could mush in my fingers, I would toss them and I wouldn't use them for a second batch. But since I found out that I can, dehydrate this, mash it up, dehydrate it and make it into a bone meal, I'm just gonna keep the bones. Okay, and you see there's just a little liquid in there from this batch of bones. And you see this is still dripping. So I try to wait as long as possible to empty these and get them into the garbage. I try to wait as long as possible because I want all that liquid to drain off. I do save my bags that I had stored these in the freezer, so then I will actually just put this back in that bag and then put it in the garbage so it's not so wet. You could put it down your garbage disposal as well, do whatever you feel fit. And then you just keep going until this pot is completely done. So let me finish straining this, at least getting all the majority of these big pieces out. And then once I do that, then I'll come back and then show you how I do the next step. So now as I am approaching getting most of the veggies and bones out with this ladle, or you could use that ladle, or you could use the measuring cup. Once I'm done with that, then I kind of take my tongs and I'll just see if there's anything down there, because this is pretty deep. This is a 20-quart stock pot, so it's pretty deep, and just to see if there's any bones, but I think I did pretty good. Just a few little things. And you don't have to be perfect here. It's more so for like big things like that, because you will get everything at the end, but it's just like, so there's no big surprises when you get to the bottom and you're dumping it out. Okay, so I cleaned up the mess that I made. Now we're going to start with the first layer of straining. So what I've decided to do for this time, I'm actually going to take the liquid out, do the first strain through here in this 8-quart pot. This is a 20-quart stock pot, and you can see that, I don't know, it's maybe it's 15, 14 quarts. That's with the stuff that's in here now. Of course, there's other food in there. I have an 8-quart stock pot, and I have a 12-quart stock pot. So I'm gonna first strain it through here, through the bigger mesh, and I'm going to put it into the 8-quart stock pot. When that gets, to just under this basket where this is hanging, then I'm gonna take that and I am going to strain it into my 12-quart stock pot, and I'm gonna strain it with the fine mesh strainer. So I'll dump this directly into my 12-quart, and the 12-quart is where it will sit for the night in the fridge, so that it gets nice and cold and gelatinous. You can use either a ladle or a Pyrex. So I usually use the Pyrex, and then when I need a break, then I just set my Pyrex here so that it's not dripping everywhere, although you will see I drip things everywhere, and then I dump it into here. So let's go ahead and just do that. And if you can get it as close as possible to minimize your spilling, that is the best. Okay, if I let this sit down, it would actually be sitting in that broth. So now I'm going to set this here. And then this, because it's dripping, I'm going to actually set it right back in here so that it can drip back in there. And now this is where I take this and I dump it into my other stock pot. So let me get that real quick just to show you the process. Typically in the past what I did is I set this right in here because see, it fits perfectly. And then I would just take this and I would dump it. I didn't do that this time because I just thought, well, I'm already making these two dirty, just use those two. But I think what I'm gonna do just for ease of use in the beginning, because I'm afraid this is gonna spill all over and you have to be very specific when you get it in there, I'm gonna dump some of that in here. Okay, that's perfect. Now, the stuff that's on the top here, it's gonna all be on the surface and it's going to congeal in that fat, and then you're just going to get rid of it anyways. So you don't have to be too worried about it. So let me finish this batch and then I'll show you kind of what I do next. So what I do next is, yes, you can let this sit here straining, draining, and then, you know, we'll do the next one. But you have to clean your strainers out because you don't want all those food particles in there. So like I let this, remember this guy, I let that sit there. So these I will dump. I'll actually just tap them upside down on my sink and then get the stuff out and then rinse them with the sprayer. So that's what I do. This one you could probably do it another couple times, but this one, because it's so fine, I like to try to get it as clean as possible. Just to kind of keep moving, I'm gonna keep going with this one. When you get to the bottom of this, you're gonna have more food particles. So it will get clogged up, it'll be thicker, quicker. So in the beginning, when you don't have as much on the top, you can let it go for a time like I'm doing. But after that, you're definitely going to want to clean that out. Again, put this back in here to let that drain while you're straining this. Now I am going to clean this out before I strain it in there. Okay, I'm set up for the last part of it. So I wanted to mention, because I didn't say this earlier and I just wanted to reassure you that you don't have to have all these stock pots to store it in. When I first did this, I put them in a bunch of different glass bowls. I had Pyrex glass bowls that had lids on them. I would put them in them. I also put them in these Pampered Chef batter bowls because they have lids on them. You can put them in whatever. It wasn't until recently I started putting them in the big containers. So I put them in the 8 quart and my 12 quart just because I do so much, and it didn't matter if I used 5 containers or 2 containers. In fact, you know, the less containers, the less fat you have to skim off from different containers. So I'm just telling you that because if you don't have all these stock pots, don't worry. Just get them in something. I would say though, because your stock is going to be warm, I would recommend either like stainless steel or a glass or ceramic. I would put it in an actual like plastic. If if you could avoid it. That would just be my recommendation. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do for the last portion of this. So we took out probably 2/3 of this already, maybe a little bit more than that. So now what I'm gonna do for my final portion of it, I'm gonna do my first strain into here, and then this will dump in here, kind of like I did with the other one, except this is my final vessel. So now I'm just going from here to here, and then here to here. So let me get that. So I could lift that out, let that strain. Okay, perfect. So now what I will do is I will take this and put a lid on it, and then I am going to put it in the fridge, and then this whole top layer will be very, very hard layer of fat. So when I come back tomorrow, because I'm gonna let this sit overnight, because it is already 10:30 at night, so I'll let this sit overnight, and then tomorrow when I go to skim this fat off, then I'll show you what that looks like and how you do it. This isn't as hardened as it normally would be on the top, and that is because I didn't put in a pig's foot or something that was very fatty. So remember, I used 3 turkey carcasses, and these were cooked from Thanksgiving. So there wasn't a lot of fat in there. There was some, but there wasn't a lot. And because I didn't add any additional things like pig's foot or chicken feet or, you know, a ham hock or something like that, this doesn't have as much fat on it as would normally happen. Now, normally what I would do is I would take my big slotted spoon like this, and this would be hard, it'd be rock hard on the top, and I would just break it, and then I would take those thick pieces of fat and then I would toss them. You could save them and use them in, you know, cooking if you wanted for a fat, if you're looking to save everything. But this is how I would do it now. Because it's kind of gelatinous, you see, but normally it would be rock hard. So you see that? That's why I use the slotted spoon, because any of the liquid can fall through it. And I always do this near the sink because then I can just toss it in my sink. And then if you rinse it with cold water, because hot will make your spoon hot, and then you don't want to do that. So, and I would go across the whole thing and do it that way. So that's what I'm gonna do for now, because this, like I said, normally this would be thicker, but this is working pretty good. And then I'm gonna show you another way to do it as well. If this was a hard fat, then this is obviously a big fork, this also would help to pick it up. Again, the slots allow for the liquid to fall through. I didn't put in the pig's foot. I forgot. That was on my bad. But this is good to show you because not all of you are gonna put pig's foot in. You're just gonna use your carcass left over. So this is good to show you both ways. Okay, so this is just a silicone barbecue brush. This also helps to take that fat off the top. So just kind of go like that, and you see it sticks. And then again, I just rinse with cold water and I repeat the process. It takes a little bit. Again, if you add anything fatty in there into your soup, you will have more fat and it'll stick to the top. So this will all be hard then, and it'll be so much easier than this. But today, this is what we're doing. I wanted to show you the fat separator that I got. This has been actually working really well to get the stuff off of the top. I just wanted to show you how to do it. So it's pretty simple. Scoop out your stock, put it right in here. I'm trying to get the top with all that on it. This holds 4 cups. A lot of them are smaller than that. A lot of them have a different design. I really like this. I'm just gonna let this sit down for a little bit. It does say in the instructions to let it sit for about a minute or so. I'm gonna show you the one that I got. I will link it below in the description, but here is the one that I got. And it's a 4 cup. It can strain out the large food pieces. Has the release lever, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It is BPA free, which is awesome. It's heat resistant and it's shatterproof, so it's not glass. The measurements are marked. It does have a silicone release valve. It does say inside the box, it comes with some instructions. It does say to not use boiling liquid, but you can use cold or hot liquid. And so you get these instructions, usage, cleaning, warnings, things like that. And it does come apart really nicely for washing. So this is the one that I got. I really like it. There are different models out there, but I like this one. Now that I have it sitting, you're gonna see on the top, hopefully you can see that the white stuff kind of floats to the top. So that is perfect. And I'm just gonna take this top off. So this top comes off real easy. And then you can see how it's kind of sitting at the top. And then when you're ready, and just for sake of time in the video, when you're ready, you just hit this little button and then you'll see it just comes right out like that. I like to take the top off because I want to see when this stuff is on getting to the bottom, and then I stop. Okay, so there's a little bit on the bottom there. And then you can see it's kind of on the sides. So then I just rinse this out. I'm gonna keep doing this. Okay, so here is the final product after straining with that fat strainer. This is what it looks like. This isn't heated up yet. This is what it looks like. So it looks much, much better. So now that you know how to make bone broth, you need to decide what you wanna do with it. You can use it fresh and use it in recipes or as a nice warm bone broth drink. Or you can pressure can it following safe, tested, and approved recipes. You could also freeze it. If you do freeze them, make sure you only fill the jar 3/4 of the way full. Otherwise, your jar could break in the freezer. You can also make a powdered version of the broth. And to learn how to do that, you can click on the iCards above, or you can look in the description below this video and I will link that video there. And lastly, you can do a combination of all of those things. So you could use some fresh, you could freeze it. If you know how to pressure can, you could pressure can it, or you could make some of that powdered bone broth. So when I made this particular batch of turkey bone broth, I pressure canned 7 quarts, and then I ended up using 3 quarts and I turned that into a powdered bouillon. And then I also gave some of the fresh broth to my sister. So I used the fresh, the canned, and the powdered. So I was able to use this one batch of turkey bone broth in 3 separate ways. And that's why I like to make big batches. I hope this video was thorough enough that you feel confident in making your own bone broth. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below and I will be sure to follow up with you. Again, it's Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And until next time, enjoy making your bone broth.